Okay, hi everybody, and I am continuing here on this same day. This is program number 49 of externalization of the hierarchy, and this was about over here about 1 hour and 2 minutes or something like that. I think something like that. I won't go looking for it right now. We've been talking about the kinds of different people that are reacting in three types of humanity. And they are responding to the higher energies and to the spirit of resurrection, but it goes all the way from a quite naive response to a response which is more intelligent. We're about to begin that, you know. The wild-eyed idealists think of things which are thousands of years ahead and cannot be materialized at this point, and so it does no good. A vision of the impossible, says the Tibetan, is not the type of vision which will keep the people from perishing. Because of an inability to compromise, that's one of the key ideas of the sixth ray. Because of the inability to compromise and to face things as they are, these people and those whom they influence are landed in despair and disillusionment. Okay, another group out of the three are the intelligent people of the world who are actuated by the spirit of goodwill, love and action. That's what goodwill is, and by the conviction that things must be changed. And notice it's not just a vague hope, it's a conviction, it's a firm decision, a firm thought that things must be changed. They are often staggered by the magnitude of the task undertaken. And this frequently leads them to take one of three positions. Well, okay, and here are the three positions. They fall into the depths of pessimism. It is a pessimism based on a real ability to sense the scope of the problem and to assess the resources available, which never seem sufficient. And this may land them into non-activity. So much foresight that activity is reduced because it's deemed to be impossible. Okay, point B, they may leave the, I'll just, highlight these things. They may leave the settling of the problem to the trained statesmen, diplomats and politicians, standing ready to help when, but only when, decision has been made. This I was going to say, this is an abdication of responsibility. This leads to a shifting of responsibility, yet because the war involved the people of all lands and masses of population, so must the reconstruction of the world. So let's just say, come on now. Responsibility cannot be evaded. No matter how realistic you are, there's always the hope. when it's combined with correct, intelligent action. And then the last group. And let's take a look. They may assume responsibility, ventilate the abuses which must be put right, discuss proposed plans, and from their particular angle of vision and their limitations, of course, set to work to bring about, to the best of their ability, right human relations, the great theme of Shambhala at this time, as we are told. This attitude of responsibility and consequent activity may lead to mistakes, but in the aggregate of the endeavor, it will meet the demand for right action in an emergency, this time a world emergency. So basically the aggregate of endeavor, if enough people attempt this, it will meet the need. Okay. Now, those partisan and nationally minded persons who will attempt to exploit the world situation for their own immediate needs. This seems like another category, unless somehow it's included in the ones above. The ones above, the wild idealists, the intelligent people, yes. I think this is the one about the intelligent people. And yes, number 3, the partisan and nationally minded types. And we certainly do see that today. It's quite a horror, really, to take advantage of one's fellow human beings the way they are. So those partisan and nationally minded persons, there's an epidemic of this at the moment, who will attempt to exploit the world situation for their own immediate ends and for the benefiting of their particular nation or group. And if it's really selfish, it will be simply for their own particular ends, such as we witness in the United States at this time in May of 2020. These people, and they are to be found in every nation, are selfishly motivated. They do not care for humanity as a whole and have no liking or interest in anything or anyone but their political party and the reactionary interests of some national group. It's a sad sight when this occurs, and it leads to the privation of the whole, of the members of the whole. They see in the present world situation a grand opportunity to engineer moves which will benefit an individual, a class, or a nation. Obviously they are not inclusive. They, in doing this, they frequently have a wide grasp of affairs and are keen politicians, but all they know is to be used and so implemented that it attains their narrow ends, no matter what the cost to the rest of the world. Well, we're in this now, when those in the highest office of the land are there to basically enrich themselves at the expense of the populace and care not about the health and welfare and education of the populace. These people are usually a large majority. We see this to a certain extent now, but interestingly, they are a minority, a slight minority, when it comes to assessing the dire situation in which a number of countries find themselves. Are usually a large majority. Their attitude leads inevitably to trouble and hinders the work of restoration. It handicaps those who are seeking to establish the entire human family in a sounder way of life than heretofore, and to give a saner and wiser motivation to international relationships. After all of the experience we've had, all the loss during various wars, all the social injustices and so forth, you would think that this type would be recognized and put down and not allowed to interfere with the progress of the whole. But we are not yet in that state where the larger issues are deemed interesting to this type of individual. These are the people who are the most to be feared at the coming conference in San Francisco. I guess this is the founding of the United Nations, now some 75 years later. The isolationists in all nations, particularly in the United States, French national idealism, I suppose, playing off the Leo personality, and the obsession of certain factors in the Polish race over boundaries will need watching. I think maybe perhaps Poland has recovered from that tendency, as these attitudes can be exploited by the evil and selfish interests which, behind the scenes, are seeking to prevent the world attaining that equilibrium which will permit tranquility. Libra, equilibrium, tranquility, peace. These three groups, however, indicate the successful operation of the forces of restoration. The idealists, unrealistic, the intelligent, and the selfish. I think I'll put that in, the unrealistic idealists, the intelligent, time to get this fixed, and the selfish. I'm not that bad a typist. My computer keyboard has a mind of its own. Yes, this is the problem. And it still exists. We have not grown our way yet out of the tendencies, especially of the selfish and the impractical, and the depression of those who are intelligent, and basically their vision, their sound vision, accompanied by their futility. Okay, so here we've looked at the forces of restoration, resurrection. It's the resurrection of humanity and the restoration of the divine plan. It's a beginning, a new beginning with implications for the coming Aquarian age, opening up the wider, the vaster possibilities of the Aquarian age with all its, and DK uses the word, wonder. We're right on the cusp of that, and I suppose we have to choose those with whom we will work. I'm assuming here, though, that this kind of material is for aspirants and disciples who have made a choice which will take them into the fifth kingdom of nature, the kingdom of souls, which begins to occur at the first initiation. Okay, now the Taurian forces, the forces of enlightenment, which we celebrate every Wesak, whether or not that Wesak is officiated, as it were, by the Buddha, whether in some other way he influences, whether the new group of world servers in their higher ranks are providing a conduit. Certainly there must be a conduit, and hierarchy is very aware of this. But we know that the higher beings, such as the Buddha, will not abandon their task carried out for so many centuries unless it is in the interests of humanity to do so. So there are many ways of reaching humanity with inspiration, and one of them is simply being a member of the triangle surrounding the Christ and giving to the Christ his three vestures, I suppose normally considered his triadal vehicles, as he is on the monadic and logoic planes and is a resident of Shambhala and is not in need of those anymore, but perhaps, you know, he, in his very, very high place, he inspires the Christ, works with him, and the Christ is making the great descent into much more obstructive and difficult arena. Such is the nature of sacrifice. The great being Sanat Kumara, emanation of the planetary logos, is called the great sacrifice, and when the Christ prays to our Father in heaven, he's praying to, you know, towards his own monad and basically towards Sanat Kumara, and is learning ever more refined degrees of sacrifice. Okay, forces of enlightenment, a realization of the need of humanity and a careful appraisal of that which must be done to meet the need have awakened the men of goodwill to responsiveness to the forces of restoration. Men of goodwill, and that of course includes the new group of world servers and men and women of goodwill, of course. You know, the word men means manus, and it has much to do with the position of our particular creative hierarchy in the scheme of things. It's not about the division of the sexes. So the men and women of goodwill have awakened, not the way they will ultimately awaken when, according to Moria, people will vie with each other to see who can do the most good, which is, of course, a consummation devoutly to be hoped. So this awakening, this has led to an insistent demand that the second phase of the hierarchical work be set in motion. These are very subjective signs, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and the hierarchy works with those energies. We cannot, and they all feed into each other. There will be no reconstruction unless there is an enlightened restoration, and we could go around the triangle and say that none of these things could happen without the other. This phase is directed towards those activities and the development of the invocative spirit, which will bring the forces of enlightenment, and they're very high beings, that the forces of light bring illumination to mankind. They're very high, into contact with humanity and lead to activity on their part. Well, ignorance in Buddhism is considered the great sin, and I think we can see why, because when we are ignorant, we choose incorrectly and we act in such a way as to obstruct, even if we don't know we are doing that. So let us not be ignorant of the ways that we can get in the way. These forces can function, page 462, fully, and until 1949, hold sway over the minds of men. If the people, now why 1949? Well, of course, that was the year Alice Bailey died, and this particular teaching went into abeyance. Now it's your chance to absorb and assimilate. And have we done that? But anyway, these forces can function fully and until 1949 hold sway over the minds of men if the peoples of the world can be organized to stand with massed intent, we might say Vulcan, spiritual will, as much of it as we can receive, behind that type of statesmanship which is seeking the greatest good of the greatest number. Now that's real statesmanship, not America first, not any country first. It's like looking at a body and saying, lungs first, heart first, hands first, whatever, head first. We need it all. So the kind of statesmanship which is seeking the greatest good of the greatest number, which sees the world as one great interdependent whole, and which refuses to be sidetracked by the clamoring of the selfish little minds or by the demand of the reactionary forces to be found in all lands. And, the reactionary forces are full of will. They're not full of goodwill, but they're full of will. And they tend to operate along the line of form 1357, but when the sixth ray is introduced, they become even more fanatical. Rays 2 and 4 perhaps do not tend so much to be among the reactionary forces. Well, 1949. 71 years ago, when this program was being made. And DK knows the inner cycles, the masters do, all knowledge, it's called, on the third subplane of the atmic plane, and it includes knowledge of the great cycles. These forces of enlightenment are always present on Earth. Taurus and Earth have a very close connection, and Taurus is the mother of illumination. They're always present on Earth on a small scale, influencing the minds of the new group of world servers, the selfless workers for humanity, and the thinkers, not just the receivers, but the active thinkers in every school of thought, working in every field of human betterment. They work upon and through all who truly love their fellow men. Well, it's easy to say I love my fellow human beings, But what does it mean? Is it true? Is it experienced? Can you look at people doing the most awful things and say, I love my fellow human beings? But then we're, taught in the Bible that while we do condemn the sin, we do not condemn the sinner. It's a wisdom vibration, and Taurus, as the second sign, relates to the second ray through numerological affinity, but it's not so much the love energy as the wisdom energy. DK details this somewhat in esoteric esoteric astrology book in the Taurus chapter. So these forces of enlightenment, are unable to influence the minds of the closed egocentric person, aka some of our leaders. They can do little with the separative isolationist. They are ineffectual where the theologian of all groups, political, religious, or social, is concerned. These theologians, they are brittlely fixed regarding their estimation of the truth, and they will not relinquish their adherence to those crystallized thought forms. And they can do little with the type of mind that is concentrated upon personal or group problems. Interesting. Their group, expressing their ideas and working their way, the group leader and so forth, and who fail to see themselves or the group in relation to the whole of humanity. So we have this whole issue of I want to make this correct. We have this whole issue of learning to see in relation. My E's are letting me down. I think we have to go under the keyboard and remove some obstructions. So they just can't get through. And obviously even the Christ utilizing the body of Jesus just couldn't get through to some. And he being, even at that time, the head of the hierarchy, he couldn't get through. There were such ramparts of obstruction that they deflected the good he had to say. For instance, he's healing on the Sabbath, and they say, well, you can't heal on the Sabbath because the law says you can't do anything on the Sabbath, basically, except maybe, study or something. And the welfare of the people healed is not at all taken into consideration. So it's sad when the good cannot get through, but we human beings have learned how to resist very effectively. Today, however, a community of suffering and a general recognition that the causes of the war are to be found in selfishness and in inherent cruelty, kind of an original sin of the lower man, has greatly widened people's approach to reality and to possibility as they exist today. Suffering opens the door, Oh, God. to wider and deeper reality. Churchmen, statesmen, and leaders of important world groups are admitting the failure of their church or their legislative bodies or their policies to bring about world order and world tranquility. In this respect, he said that Masonry was before the bar of humanity's judgment, and that it too had failed. The church, Masonry, the educational methods all failed to preserve world order and bring about tranquility. But with the Christ reappearing, they will not fail again. Sometimes we guarantee a future success when we fail badly one time. They are seeking earnestly for new ways in government, new modes of suitable living, and for a method whereby right human relations can be established. Well, after you've been through something like the World War with all the millions killed under terribly cruel circumstances, you would have to be hard indeed, as he sometimes describes the sign Capricorn in its lower, rather more evil expression, in order not to hope for something better and work for it. They present a field of expression to the forces of enlightenment and offer them opportunity to change the ways of human thinking. This is where education becomes so completely indispensable. You know the old saying, I probably said it before, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. They are being mobilized by the light-bearing energies upon the planet. Now, they work in Shambhala too, you know. The lights that carry out the will of God. Is it maybe in the sixth rule they are featured, the sixth rule for disciples and initiates? The light-bearing energies upon the planet so that wisdom, understanding, and skill in action may distinguish the activities of men in the immediate future. And here we have a whole lot of Ray 2 and Ray 7, I would say. So the forces of enlightenment are at work, attempting to influence humanity somehow in the right direction. We are an obdurate race. How is it that the human family has become so stubborn, so fixated upon that which does not lead to growth? Well, it all goes back, doesn't it, to, we're told, the rejection of the teaching of the God Kings back in the Lemurian days, when solar angels actually took on the vehicles of a human being, and being entirely different from the average animal man of the time, tried to lead them into the light. Now, many of us, we may have been part of that Lemurian expression, but generally the people who are disciples today have a connection with the moon chain, and the moon chain people in general did not incarnate in Lemuria. Though the members of the third, or well, earlier, the first major solar system did incarnate in Lemuria. So one day our experience will be traced, and probably the impression will be how pitifully slow we reacted to opportunity. I guess our planetary locus himself has a problem. It's called the problem of personality. He's a non-sacred planet, or manifests through a non-sacred planet. And there's quite a difference between the beings manifesting through the 7 sacred planets and those through the non-sacred planets. But Earth is inwardly sacred, and hence our struggle between the inner sacredness and the outer profane expression. Profane, before the gate of the temple, but still outside, you see. The organizer of these forces at this time is the Buddha. And, it shows you how he works for the planet and works for humanity. He is the symbol of enlightenment or of illumination. Taurus, his sign of birth, the sign of his great 6th initiation, very high illumination, and the sign of his departure is the mother of illumination. Countless millions down the ages have recognized him as the light, as a light bearer, not the only one, of course, from on high. His 4 noble truths express the causes of human trouble. Well, we really need to know those causes, convince ourselves of their reality because we see it, and work on them, and point it to the cure. So a great psychological physician he was and is. His message can be paraphrased in the following words: cease to identify yourselves with material things, gain a proper sense of spiritual values, cease regarding possessions and earthly existence as of major importance, follow the noble eightfold path, which is the path of right relations to God and to each other. There's the cross. And thus, be happy. So simple. At least the outcome is meant to be simple. These steps on the path are. So this is the, let's say, 4 noble truths. And of course, my E is not functioning, So I just have to put it in somehow. Four noble truths. And we should really have these in various ways impressed upon our minds. I'll read it again. "14, so too much fussing over the letter E, that's for sure. Cease identifying yourself with material things, including the material personality. Gain a proper sense of spiritual values. What's really worth having, doing, thinking. Who are we? Cease regarding possessions, gross materializations, really. But you can possess on subtler realms of the personality. It still is inadequate and material compared to being possessed by the Spirit. Cease regarding possessions and earthly existence as of major importance, and then follow the noble eightfold path and be happy. Well, you know, there's some things that I wish I had known when I was a child. Being raised in a foreign atmosphere of a language I didn't understand, and an approach to God which was childish and old. Something about what the Buddha is presenting is ever new, at least for a long time, until the entirety of humanity follows this sage advice and gains its enlightenment, gains its freedom, and can see at last. Well, you know, the noble eightfold path is expressed in different ways. Different words are used, but values belong to Venus and to Taurus, and our values are what we keenly desire. So at least they should lead to freedom and not to further enslavement. Right speech. We create prisons with our speech. We are always materializing something. As Roberto Assagioli said in the introduction, I suppose, to his psychosynthesis manual, whenever we think even, or when we speak, we are responsible for even a tiny materialization. We're creating forms. Do those forms build and energize what is needed, or are they producing for us a prison? So check out the 15 counsels in the Treatise on White Magic on page 473, 474, 475, right in there. And you will see how important is right speech. Right mode of living, well, we all have to earn our daily bread. It should be in line with our soul intent, and it should not drag others down. It should not be obstructive to the beauty of the future. You can make a lot of money, let's call it money for the moment, doing bad things and even stealing from others. Obviously, if your mode of living worsens the life of others, it is not right. Notice this right-hand idea. Sometimes we identify the right and the far right at this time with reactionary response, a backwards obstructive response. Right thinking, well, this is a generic. The Buddha was a great thinker. With his third ray monad, at least one of those monadic rays was on the third ray. And DK deals with this in Cosmic Fire. The ability to put in separate appearances, 3 separate appearances, independent of each other. It's a great mystery, the third ray monad. But he achieved his enlightenment on the cosmic mental plane. Through the power of thought, he penetrated into reality. Right aspiration, it's a bit like right values, let us aspire to the truly worthy things. There are all manner of aspirations for unworthy objectives. And just because one wants something fervently does not mean that what one wants is good for one or good for others or, good for materialization of the divine plan. Then the whole question of law, right conduct, the outer behavior has to be such that it is not impedimentary, in the way of other people. We do not trespass. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So there is a divine pattern of conduct. And if we deviate from that, we're simply causing trouble below, in that realm below, which is to reflect the archetype, and we don't build the right patterns. I guess these are all a bit interdependent. Right effort, we expend a lot of energy. Do we do it wisely? Do we work in such a way that we have skill in action and an ability to truly accomplish something of value through our efforts? There's an old saying, there is a difference between action and motion. With action, you accomplish something. With motion, you may not accomplish anything except the expenditure of energy. So it has to be disciplined effort. Now, obviously, hundreds of books have been written on the Noble Eightfold Path. I'm just kind of reviewing the kinds of things that come to me. And just giving little hints to myself and to those who may be viewing this. It's good for you to sit down and every one of these is a theme for meditation, and we can evaluate ourselves to see whether what we do is right. I've wasted a lot of energy in my life when with Aries people, the outrushing urge to spend energy is very strong. So how do you get a hold of that and really direct it properly? And then interesting closing injunction, right rapture or true happiness. There's all kinds of ways to be happy about that which is of lesser value. And there's selfish rapture too, being so involved in your isolated happiness, if you can call it happiness, that you ignore the needs of others. The right rapture and the true happiness includes seeing the welfare of others achieved. It's not selfish in the least, but there are people who go around in a so-called state of bliss, which insulates them from many of the evil circumstances and distressing circumstances. And, if you think about Devachan, it can be useful, DK tells us, and you can't just opt out of it because you want to. But essentially, it's a somewhat selfish and illusory state because it does not really touch factual reality. It's a great arena of wish fulfillment. So what is it that makes you happy, and what do you enjoy the most? I think for me, it's always been the great moments in music, which are transcendent, and they lift you onto the Buddhic plane. not all music is Buddhic. A lot of music today is, it will drag you down into prison, or it will never rise above the diaphragm into the heart. And there's a lot of sentimentality about it, but there are great works of art. I'm trying to think, that Mahler, obvious Ray Soul, he wrote a choral symphony, a section that is choral. And Beethoven wrote the Ninth Symphony, which has the fourth movement with many choir entries. It's the choral section, and it just is transcendent. It's hard to believe that we will be introduced to a kind of music that outstrips such greatness. But if the great cathedrals will look like building blocks compared to what will be built and designed, then maybe that's true about music also. And I wonder about the next incarnation of J.S. Bach, that the music might be so wonderful you almost can't survive it, almost can't stay in the body, because it is so wondrous. Well, let's experience that together. The Deva kingdom is being trained along that line by the Master Serapis, so that they can acquiesce and teach and participate. We really, I think, have no conception of what is coming, but every time we get a little more reality into our consciousness, even though a tiny increment, we're coming closer to the wonder of the new age. So the Buddha's ancient message, his ancient message, is as new today as it was when he spoke his words on earth. They wandered through India from preserve to preserve, from garden to garden, and they used the begging bowl, and they always compensated in blessing the gift that was given, if you valued such things. As new today as it was then. A recognition of its truth and value is desperately needed. The truth and value of his teaching, and the following of the 8 right ways of living will enable humanity to find liberation. Well, nothing could be clearer than that, The following of the Noble Eightfold Path. This may, seem very far away from the rapturous mystical approach. And in a way it is. This is a much more rational way of proceeding. After all, it's started by an initiate with a Ray 3 monad. It is logical, well thought through, not simply rapturous, though the rapture is there and achieved in scientific ways. Following of the 8 right ways of living. I like that phrase, and I had not been so aware of it, maybe. It is on the foundation of his teaching, a teaching that was useful for those who were becoming accepted disciples, but also for arhats, interestingly. He numbered among his students 4th degree initiates, or those on the verge of it. It is on the foundation of his teaching that the Christ raised the superstructure of the brotherhood of man to form an expression of the love of God. So 2 different aspects of divinity, It's not that the Buddha had only wisdom and not love, or vice versa for the Christ. They both had both. But the emphasis is different, shall we say. A third-ray monad emphasis for the Buddha, a second-ray monad emphasis for the Christ. Today, as it views the crumbling, devastated world, this is so different now. We see what the great storms are doing, the earthquakes, the fires, and the accidents where elemental forces are released destructively. Today, as it views the crumbling, devastated world, mankind has a fresh opportunity to reject selfish, materialistic motives and philosophy, and to begin those processes which will steadily and gradually, that's the second-ray method, wise use of slow action, bring about its liberation. Not rushing forward, not running so straight, run not so straight. It tells us in the sixth ray law of repulse, because the path that the runner is on leads to the outer circle and not to the center. So by the wise use of steady action, slow action, liberation will come. It will then be possible for men to tread the lighted way, which leads back to the divine source of light and love, leads back to the monad essentially. And via that instrument we call the antakarana, you never can reach at this stage the permanent atoms of Buddhi and Atma. They are too high. But you can receive energy from them. And even a master does not reach the permanent atoms of the first two subplanes of the Buddhic and Atmic planes. And what will we find on the monadic plane? There's a little bit of discussion about that, and about the movement of different kinds of monads on the upper four subplanes of the monadic plane. The Buddha could point to the goal and indicate the way. Now notice China. I indicate the way. Remember its motto, right? So, motto of China, I indicate the way. And in Western China, which is really Tibet as we know it now, there will be a great, and I think in a way, climactic school for those who are on the verge of really becoming monadically inspired, on the verge of the fourth degree and so forth, and near the hierarchy, proximate to the outer living place of the hierarchy. Indicate the way. Sometimes when you get across reference like that, it's really good to compare them. It's a little obscure what it can mean in China, I indicate the way, but when you think that the Buddha is doing the same thing, it's the way of higher evolution, I believe. The final path as far as the fourth creative hierarchy is concerned, way of higher evolution. Wait a second. Oh, I'm going to just write it out. And sure enough, you know, my E does not work. Oh my. But that's taking care of things, you know. There it is. The Buddha could point to the goal and indicate the way because he had achieved full enlightenment, well on the cosmic mental plane. Is that what full enlightenment is? Maybe in terms of the members of the fourth grade of hierarchy, it is. The Christ gave us an example of one who has reached the same goal. The Buddha left the world after reaching illumination, you know, with his arhats and with his students, and the Christ returned to us, proclaiming himself as the light of the world. They're both the light of the world, and as DK says, Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes, is also known for having declared himself the light of the world. And if we said that for ourselves, would we know what we were saying? Because essentially it is true. And showed us how we too could learn to tread the lighted way. Well, I think if I want to stick to this approximately 1 hour programs, yeah, maybe it's best to leave off here. Something in me wants to just forge ahead, but it's not the body that wants to forge ahead. It's the psyche and the will. So it's 464, you know, basically, and it's number 49 and 464. And the date is, again, the 19th. And I'll copy this and bring it down. You know, obviously, this is once over lightly, and we're still involved in the forces of enlightenment, of which the Buddha is seeming to be the supreme head, you know, using the energies of Taurus, even though, you know, Sanat Kumara is, of course, the greatest example of the teaching ray on our planet at this time. So this is 464, and I'm going to erase this. And, you know, it's going to be approximately, I don't know, 1 hour and 5 minutes, roughly, maybe something like that. And it's the 19th of May, and I don't know when resumption will occur, but it will be program number 50. And page 464 to something else. All right. Okay, friends, I'm hoping that this goes to the cloud and is recorded correctly. There are many advantages to the Zoom program, but it's also a bit more complex than GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. So I've made my share of mistakes. So let's see when we take up again the Buddha and his festival. Remember, this is written, I think, in 1945, and it was in the Waisak message of 1945. 46, the Tibetan talked about the Buddha being with us for a few more decades, and probably not beyond that, which would have taken us approximately to 1981, about 40 years ago. And I remember very well Mary Bailey in headquarters where I was working, and she was the director and so forth, trying to tell us, the students, the workers, about this new possibility. So, okay, lots of love, many blessings, and we will proceed. I mean, there's still quite a bit more in this book, you know, quite a few more pages, really. I don't know how many more pages. I'm sure, work my brothers. Oh boy, it ends with that injunction. 693, 694, 701, and we are in 465. I don't know, another 240 pages, approximately. Well, somehow we will persist, God willing, and produce study material from which we can all truly benefit, you know. So, I'll stop the recording and end this particular program. Enjoy your studies. And yes, I want to stop this cloud recording.